So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am, my skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it can be used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is.
All right. Happy Friday, my friends. This is Erica Lukes. Happy to be here with you guys every Friday, pushing the boundaries, getting into a little bit of trouble. It's kind of the way I roll. And I am sure that after last week's show, some heads were turning, and that's clearly evidenced in some of the things that I'm seeing that are getting released, which always helps me to know that I'm on the right track with my research and where I'm pointing. Now, of course, we've seen a huge flurry of activity in the land of UFO land, and we saw New York Times do another fluff piece on Robert Bigelow, and it's entitled, "Can Robert Bigelow and the Rest of Us Survive Death?" And so now, of course, we're going from, UFOs, which at the end of the day, he never provided anything of substance with regard to that, but he and his friends, I think, made quite a great deal of money off of the UFO topic and stirred the narrative, yada, yada. But it was very interesting. Now he's offering $1 million in prizes for the best evidence of the survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death. And something that he did mention, which I found very interesting in this New York Times article by Blumenthal, another one by him, things I don't mind talking about. And it says, after studying business at Arizona State University, Mr. Bigelow followed his father into real estate, founding Budget Suites. They furnished units rentable by week or month, catering to low-income workers living on tips or paycheck to paycheck, a housing category that falls into a gray area of non-eviction edicts during the pandemic. The New York Times reported in December that Budget Suites had filed at least 46 eviction actions in Texas and Arizona, winning half in court. Mr. Bigelow called the tenant complaints phony, and he said his company often extended financing to those needing to pay more time. I think it's very interesting that that specifically came up in the New York Times article, because I specifically talked about that in my show last week, citing example after example of this, which you can find on the internet. And this is something that, again, leads me to put together a bigger put together the pieces of the puzzle, and it shows somebody perhaps with questionable interests, business practices. I mentioned you can go to Glassdoor reviews, look at the reviews from people that were there, and then you also look at the fact that we've got the potential for testing non-lethal weapons on unconsenting people at Skinwalker Ranch. Put it together, and is this really somebody that you want telling you about life after death? Because that kind of scares me a little bit. But anyway, there you go. There's my thing. There's my shtick. You can find me on UFOclassified.com. Support the show. You can make a donation, and if you make a 3-month donation in a row, you get UFO Classified swag, which is actually pretty cool. I just got a UFO Classified hoodie in the mail, and I've been wearing that, and I love it. So if you support the show, I appreciate it very much. I am here now with somebody who's been on the show. He is a friend and colleague of mine. We have been on adventures together, and that is fantastic. We'll talk a little bit about that. He is also the executive director of NARCAP, and he has been doing this for 20 years. Ted Roe, thank you. Welcome to the show. And I mean, okay, so how long? It's been 20 years.
Years prior to that, I
spent time just studying the UFO field and studying what was known and understood about phenomena before having an experience and then finding myself suddenly working with the top minds in the field.
Well, and this is, really, it's interesting because, like I said, you've been on the show so many times. You and I have known each other for, 6 years at least?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, about 6 years.
Yeah, and we spoke at the UFO Congress together in 2017, which was we have stories from that conference, let me tell you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Have we ever talked? Have we ever? I wonder if we've ever actually told anybody those stories, because a couple of them are pretty good with regard to the absolute nuttery that goes on at some of these conferences.
Yeah. Well, it's the field in general, but I don't often do conferences. I don't often do speaking, and it was very interesting to find myself dealing with your average UFO person there. Very illuminating, not terribly encouraging, but illuminating.
Well, it was very interesting. I actually had a great time, and that was fun to see friends, mm-hmm. and to again, when you go to the conferences, you get a really good idea of the lay of the land, and which is important. And I think both you and I have come to the conclusion that the quote-unquote UFO community is perhaps a little bit more dysfunctional than we had realized, and it's not. If we want to make true breakthroughs in the subject, you're not going to get there that way.
How diplomatic of you.
Why, thank you. Well,
nice.
I've been practicing since my show last week. I was quite naughty.
Well, the simple fact is that in 80 years that we've been consciously noticing UFOs and talking about them in media, nobody's managed to come up with any information about UFOs in general. It's been primarily people standing up and talking about them and being known for talking about UFOs. And I've always wondered how come the information never moves. Why doesn't science take an interest in the field and so on? I came to it as a layman who had direct experience, and not with little lights in the sky or anything. I've had direct observations of devices, technologies from less than an arm's length away from myself, standing there looking at them. And so there's a there there. There's something to it. I've seen their occupants on 2 occasions. And that's as a layman, and that and 575 will get you a Frappuccino at Starbucks. I don't know, maybe.
Not even that.
And not even that. And so I know the weight of my anecdote against science and logic, and it doesn't stand up. But I know what I've seen, and I had an experience in Oakland, California, in January of 1999.
And I quote, I said, I don't have a problem. She said, I think you do. She said,
sick to the point that
sit your goddamn
later, out of desperation,
stool, shut your mouth, and do
the PR office at Ames Research Center.
That is a direct quote, and I'm using exactly the same words that were used to this man.
In a matter of a few hours,
what happened next? Then she said, on second thought,
about what had happened and what the story was,
and so let me ask you, because I think this is fascinating, and I know you've been on other shows and you've talked about this before, but I think the more time goes by, the more I want to know the meat and potatoes of the initial phone conversation, mm-hmm. and what specifically Dr. Haynes mm-hmm. asked you, and how then you became involved in all of this, because I think that's really important.
Well, originally I was a witness and experiencer, and I wasn't alone with this incident, by the way. I had 2 friends in the car with me when this thing happened, and it involved a very close approach by a cylindrical object that was transparent. You could see into it and see the occupants and the whole 9 yards, and the thing just rolled right up to our car, and we saw it come from miles away in the middle of Oakland, and there it was. And so here I am with this occupant experience, and I'm a layman. I'm not involved in ufology. I've never been to a conference. I've read books and I've followed people. I knew who Dr. Haynes was, and I considered him one of the stronger voices in the field. And I was shocked that when he showed up as a response to my email, he invited me over to his place. We underwent some interrogative questioning and took more information. And then he came to me and he asked me what I thought about a plan he had for putting together a reporting system for pilots. And we kicked it back and forth a little bit, and then I took the reins to get the business side of it going, and then he started calling in his friends and contacts, from everybody from Dr. Bully to Dr. Heish to just you name it. But a lot of the top minds in the field were involved in the genesis of NARCAP. And then we worked with them. We ended up doing. We did a briefing at the Battelle bunker where the FAA, ASRS, Aviation Safety Reporting System analysts are sequestered, briefing their analysts and their managers on UAP observations. Turned out that one of the people on our staff was, at the time, the chief of the Aviation Safety Program Office at Ames. So we had champions helping us with our cause, which was aviation safety, UAP and aviation safety. The idea that pilots not only are seeing them, but they're having problems with them. And it's fairly obvious when you read pilot reports that there are safety factors involved. So it was pretty easy to build that logic and to develop cases and methodology to address examining that information. And so we briefed the ASRS group at Battelle. We did a number of things behind the scenes. We were involved in an initiative in Washington, D.C. that led to a congressional hearing. We did a lot of things behind the scenes, and it was mainly because of the pull of the people at the top, and Dr. Haynes and Dr. Bully and so on. Bully had a history of working with UFOs in government and so on, so that all worked in our favor. But what I found really interesting in all of this, I trained with these guys for 15 years. Okay, I learned how to write academic papers and how to edit them. I learned how to publish. I learned what guidelines and standards are for research and publication. And then I turned around and I started looking at them, and they came up wanting ethically, and there were a number of things. I'm not going to go into them here on the show, but a number of things, including cases with inappropriate or falsified data, just unethical things that wouldn't pass muster if you were trying to submit your material to a bona fide science journal. And because my interest is solely in resolving the question of what UAP are and how to mitigate, I really don't have any patience for the other games, the branding and the how many Twitter hits you're getting and who's following you on Facebook and all the rest of the stuff. In fact, I closed down.
Are you kidding? You don't care? You don't count your Twitter followers?
I don't know how many I have. It's probably not many.
Whatever.
You know? It's more about who they are. If I only had 5 followers and they were the 5 followers I wanted, that's all that matters. I do not care about the masses, you know, in following me. Okay, I'm not leading anyone. I'm trying to get to the answers to things I've seen with my own eyes. And it seems to me that a good portion of the leadership, the people occupying the podiums these days, and hey, up for all along, never really had that in mind. They're storytellers, and worse. And in the 20 years I've been in this field, I have seen behavior that just wouldn't fly in any other scientific endeavor. You know, just people stealing data, people stealing ideas, people. Everything's about self-aggrandizement. Everything's about being the one. You know, got to be the big shot, or got to be associated with the big shot. There's a whole cottage industry of so-called investigative writers out there that Some probably are, and an awful lot of them they needed a name, but basically what they're doing is moving the buzz around. And I had a person the other day, I told you this story, I had posted on my Twitter, I asked how many people, or how many UAP researchers adhere to, or how many UAP researchers can share their standards of research with us. So, okay, you've got your research team out there and everything, you must have standards of research. What are they? And don't come at me with scientific method or whatever. There are specific lists of standards of research, and you will not get published in a journal without it. Your information will sit and rot on academia or somewhere, because it won't be accepted by the scientific community because it hasn't gone through the proper vetting that science needs to go through in order for other scientists to take it seriously. And that's what's happened over and over again in our field. There are very good minds out there, and we really need to hear them. We really need their contributions, but they're not being encouraged. They're not being brought into this. It's a wild west of ridiculousness and the kind of abuse I've seen and experienced in this field, right out to death threats, is just indicative that there's some things very wrong in this field, and not just with the people that are interested in it, but the people that are leading it. They're the people that are the most prominent in it. I should say it that way, because they're not leading; they're prominent.
And this is exactly it.
Their name is better known than my name, right? Which is fine. Nobody needs to know my name, but knowing their name seems to be really important. And I don't know what that has to do with understanding what UFOs are and are not, and what kind of threat they may or may not represent. But that's where the conversation is in the field today. We're all waiting around for the government. Well, we got this DNI report going to come out in June. Let me just look into my crystal ball and do the remote viewing thing. Okay.
Here, wait, let me get some radiation to expose you to before you try your remote viewing.
Okay.
Might work out better for you that way.
Here goes. All right, I'm looking ahead. It's June, and what I'm seeing is a couple of paragraphs of nonsense in the public domain, a classified report, and a government that won't speak about it anymore until it's absolutely forced to do it again sometime in the future by somebody else. That's what I see, okay? I don't see anything in that turning around and giving us the information that we have all dedicated life and time to get an answer to. And I ain't waiting for those guys. These incidents happen in front of people every day, all around the world. You don't need to have the government validate you. You need to go get the information and make sure that it stands up. And I don't care if you have any experience, if you're an academic or not. You don't need a credential. What you need to do is understand how to write an academic essay. It's an exercise in logic. Like all essays, it starts with a topic sentence, or in the case of science and academic articles, it starts with a thesis statement or a question. Then there's the body of the work is the logic supporting that question, and the conclusion is where you arrive at after studying that body of work and addressing that question. It's not rocket science, it's logic, and it either stands up or it doesn't. And so I ask UAP researchers out there everywhere to write academic articles. Learn how to write them. There are resources online to show you how to write an academic article. Learn how to write one, and then write it. Over and over again, I get videos across my desk or photographs, or they want to know my opinion, and the first thing I ask is, what's the context? Is there anything written up on this? And invariably, the answer is no. It's just a piece of video with something on it, and it's as useless to me as it is to science in general. You go march into Harvard Science Lab with that and demand their attention because you've got this picture, okay? But you got nothing. You don't have anything written up. You don't have any data that turns their head. Why would they look at it?
And why would they look at it when it is such a circus? And this is the thing, and you and I have talked about this, for hours on end. It's like you look at the circus, the clown show that is American ufology, and you look at, the Storm Area 51 or Skinwalker Ranch or Bob Lazar and blah, 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 blah. All this, just clowns. Mm-hmm. It's the flying monkeys with the man, with a bad hairdo behind the curtain and, all of this crap. And it's like, it is such a sham that, to me, clearly, the more I look at this, I'm just saying to myself, okay, it's a sham, because these people have no interest in studying UFOs. That has never been their motivation from day one. You know, you start looking into NICAP, and you look at the fact that 3 of the people that were, you know, involved with NICAP, I mean, what was their background? Psychological warfare. You've got all of these people whose, interestingly enough, their backgrounds are non-lethal weapons. And it's just time and time and time again, you see this, and it's like, holy crap. And I just want to say one more thing. And then, you know, now with the solicitation sheet for OSAP, you know, it's like you've got, I mean, here it is, it's in black and white. This is what they were doing. They were studying human effects. They were studying, you know, weapons, RF and DO weapons. None of it says UFOs. But yet the people that are so naive, so willing to believe, and I admit I went through that learning process myself, that it's like you want to defend things because you think they're the underdog, and you know, the poor them, they've been discriminated against by the Collins elite and all of these, you know, horrible things. People have taken away their funding and yada yada yada, and you know, at the end of the day, these are the people who have been there decade after decade, who have been creating this absolute crap show and hiding other things. And so for you and I to get to the bottom of a very important subject becomes more difficult, you know, by the day, because of this crap. And you know, I encourage, and you know, again, you and I have had many conversations about this, and I know we have differing approaches or differing areas of focus.
Yeah, you can say that.
Well, but you know what I mean.
So diplomatic. My God, you're so diplomatic today.
Well, you know, back when I worked for that PR firm, but I just, you know, it's like we both, at the end of the day, even though we're getting about it in a different way, we both want the same thing, and we both want.
Well, we both see this.
Yeah, we both see exactly
the same thing. Okay, there's. I don't doubt for a minute that you're pretty much on the ball as far as your suspicions around these factions. Okay, and there are factions in ufology for your listeners that are here that have no interest in resolving UFOs and every interest in holding your attention. And if you want to get to the bottom of the UFO subject, focus on UFOs and stop focusing on personalities. You know, and look at the data. Where's the information? We've got 30 years of listening to Skinwalker from George Knapp and Bigelow and assorted individuals that have picked up that narrative, but we don't have any data from Skinwalker in 30 freaking years.
But hey, wait a minute. We've got Eric Davis talking about a giant shape-shifting creature that climbed out of a portal, and you know, we've got the Shermans who have been scared out of their mind. You know,
I had that conversation with Colm Keller. I sat right across the table from him and let him talk to me about some of the strangeness that they'd encountered over there. I asked him specifically about that particular incident. And, they're very willing to talk about it, but when it comes right down to sharing data, which is another scientific standard, a research standard that truly serious-minded researchers accept, you share your data. You share it for several reasons. You share it so that it can be replicated and validated. You share it so that it can be extrapolated, so that new data can be developed from it, so that the arc that you're on is benefited by it. And everything is about the work in the arc, not you and your name. Okay? Research standards. Okay? You share your data. Nobody in ufology shares their data. Okay? You have to go outside of America to find people that share data at all. And then you got to know where to look. And I have been finding caches of just amazing data all over the place, but I had to realize, you know, where to look to find it, you know. And this whole problem of these factions, they all have agendas. They're all on their own. Some of them have to do with mind control and manipulation in an experimental way. Some of it has to do with security and mind control in another way, in a defensive way, to keep minds and away from certain subjects or discredit them before they can do damage to a reality that they're walking around the edges of. those factions. There are factions that are just completely concerned with keeping the grift going, you know, the never-ending story. And we all know there's a couple of those guys out there who've been telling a never-ending story for the last 25, 30 years and making money off of it and being followed at just as dutifully as Republicans followed Q.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about that in the second half of the hour because,
well, you know,
Mama's going to need to make a margarita for that one.
Well, my point is just that ufology, if you're going to go out and be in the public in ufology, you're walking around a carnival, and everyone has a different attraction. Everyone's got a different thing. You go in there, and they got a different ride, a different way to. But the one thing they don't have is the truth. What are UFOs?
And so let me ask you a question, because there's somebody in chat that is wondering, because they say that NARCAP isn't open with their data. And so how would you respond to that?
Well, it NARCAP was founded not on my model. I helped establish NARCAP and get NARCAP up and running, but it was Dr. Haynes and the old school folks that ran it. And if you want our data, the data that we developed while Dick Haynes was involved, the data that he shared is available through the Rocky Mountain Depository at the University of Wyoming. Otherwise, I've published all of our papers. They're there for you. And if there's anything in particular that a person had a question on, I'm there for that too. But a lot of this has been a learning arc for me because I'm a layman. I had to learn what research standards are, and then I had to turn around and start looking at what I was doing with NARCAP and realizing that those standards weren't being met. There was, and a lot of it had to do with suspicion. You know, one of the first things that Dr. Haynes did when I met him was give me a copy of a Russian counterterrorism manual. We had all our meetings were at places that were never discussed on the phone. He would tell me a number, and that would coincide with a list of places that he gave me, and I would go to that numbered place and meet him there at a specific time. We did an awful lot of this kind of thing. It was in Palo Alto. There's a lot of intelligence and security problems in that town, and he was working at NASA, and so that was the way we did it. And I would be the first one to accept that sharing data was not the practice, and it should be. Absolutely, it should be. And as far as my concerns in running NARCAP, that's the way it is run. And if so if anybody wants to know anything or wants to have anything, like for example, research photographs. You do UFO photographs, right? And you do a photo analysis of the case. Those photographs should be made available so that other people can analyze them, along with all of the raw data. It should be sitting in a data repository that's either maintained by a academic journal or that is maintained in a public area that is referenced in the article so that people can go look at it. And they can either replicate the work or advance it. And so that's the problem right there, but NARCAP was born out of that environment that doesn't do that. And it's been a learning curve for me to understand what it takes to run a transparency and openness in publication, top regulations supported by the Open Science Foundation the Committee on Publication Ethics, because that's where it all chokes down in the end, is when the only way that people know whether research is ethical or not is whether they try to publish it and that journal is peer reviewed. So peer reviewers can look at it and go, hey, this is crap, and we're not going to put this out there because we know that this doesn't add up. Not because we're biased against the information, but because clearly it doesn't meet standards of research. They've falsified data, or they've made a claim that isn't supported. And normally what you do when you're editing is you go back and you offer them a chance to clean it up. And you may or may not get an answer from that. We published an awful lot of other people's papers. We found people who wanted to publish and coached them and helped them write papers, and we published the papers on our website, which is not independent publication. That doesn't even meet the lowest standard of publication standards and research standards, but it's the best ufology has to offer right up to this moment. I'm busy working on a process that changes that, but the bottom line is that, yeah, I would agree with your listener that NARCAP didn't share data. But at the same, not always. I know Dick had a lot of relationships with a lot of people in the field, and I know there was a lot of information moving around. So I can't say that Dr. Haynes didn't share data, and I can't say that NARCAP didn't share data. I can say that there were probably situations where we didn't, and there are ways we presented our data that wasn't shareable. But I can't.
Who do you think that he worked with in that regard to share cases with? I mean, you mentioned some of the people that were surrounding him when you were initially contacted by him, and he introduced people like Jacques Vallée and people like Bernard Heisch and things like that. Who else can you think of? Was Hal Puthoff in that group? Was Kit Green in that group?
Not in the group, but everybody was peripheral to that, and they were all personalities I ended up running into. I went with Dr. Haynes to the first my first SSE conference, Society for Scientific Exploration, in 2001, and met Dr. Billy there, and he assured us he would join our organization, and then met Hal Puthoff there, and had a very interesting and series of exchanges with him that continued for some years afterwards, and ended up getting invited to a bar in North Beach in San Francisco, and having Sarfati and Kit Green and Corinne Anscombe and others come walking in. That one really took me off. Dan Smith. That one really knocked me off balance. I didn't understand how I ended up in that.
And so describe the circumstances that led up to that, because I would say if I was sitting, sitting in a room and all those people just randomly walked in, I don't know what. First
off, I didn't know these people by face. Okay, I was introduced to them. They came in and Jack sat down, and and Kit was there, and so on, and there was all this kind of. But here, what caused all this to begin with? Jack's a regular feature in North Beach in San Francisco. That's his haunt, right? Is the coffee shops there in North Beach, and that's where he generates a lot of his work. And I ended up on a couple of his email lists and asked him to remove us from it, and it didn't go well. He was, I don't know, he's a bit pugnacious, and then in the middle of that exchange, Dr. Heisch and I ended up on the cover of the San Francisco Chronicle magazine, and apparently that didn't sit right with Jack, and he called Dr. Haynes' house and dressed Dick down about NARCAP and me and blah blah blah. And I'm not sure what was really what triggered him, but he was yelling at a 90-year-old woman with Alzheimer's on the phone. So, yeah. And I told Corinne about this, Corinne Anscombe, who had friended me over the internet, and she's an English woman, and I don't know much about her at all, but she had befriended me, and said that she was going to be in San Francisco and North Beach, and would I like to meet her? And I said, sure. So I go to this meeting in San Francisco and North Beach, and she blindsides me, brings Jack in and everybody else, and here I am. Jack and I are kind of toe to toe. It's one of these things where you don't really know how it's going to go down, and but it was very cordial, and they asked me some questions about motivations and interests and opinions, and it was cordial over beer, but it was very untoward. I've got a number of these experiences in my time with NARCAP, and they leave more questions than answers in terms of knowing how to divine what they were actually about. There's a lot of nefarious nonsense going around in this field, and there's a lot of jealousy. People steal ideas. The pettiness in this thing, when you consider what's at stake, is it's ridiculous. It just is absolutely. It's mind-bending that people on one hand would believe that aliens are coming to the planet, and then on the other they're arguing about trying to get their Twitter hits up. When they don't know anything about this phenomena, and the focus should be on that.
But we've said earlier. I mean, we know that's not the focus, and that's what makes it so infuriating when you have these people who have been the poster children of of the subject for so long, and it's like they achieved this cult-like status, and yet at the end of the day, what they've done is they've lied. They have been involved with
been misrepresented,
like the Benowitz, affair, and
right,
and the John Carpenter affair, and all of these different things that have taken place, and it's like, okay, and but yet again, they're relying on the fact that we've got to, there's a high turnover rate in this topic. People get burned out because they keep hearing the same old nonsense, and then they've got a new group of young devotees that they can approach and say, hey, I really like your work, fist bump, why don't you go out there and be my PR machine, and you can further help us steer our narrative while something more nefarious is going on behind the scenes that has nothing to do with the topic. And I mean, this is, I think everybody that you mentioned that was in the bar, they sound, like they were involved in that. I would say knowingly, but do you think some of them could have been?
It very well could have been some kind of an intelligence probe by either a faction or something else. There are a lot of different interests in this field. I've recently set up a UAP related website, okay, and it's active, but it's not. It's still under construction. Okay, and the first and most prominent visits on my website are from Chinese IP addresses, which is also true of the NARCAP website. The second or third most active country in NARCAP is China, believe it or not because they're steady in their visits. We get a lot of visits from France. We get a lot of visits from. We don't get very many visits from Russia. We get a lot of. 120 countries at least, okay, and growing all the time since I did the website rebuild for NARCAP. My pilot advisory has got thousands and thousands and thousands of views in 120 countries. The information, it's out there, but there are these factions that are watching it. The Chinese would like to very much know about military cases. I won't publish military cases on the NARCAP website because I don't want sensing capabilities and any other military-related information to be easily available in the net for adversaries. And is that not sharing data? I don't know. I've made it rather clear that I'm fine with making sure that those people are available to congressmen if they want to talk to them in private. A lot of these guys are still active duty, and some of them have very responsible positions, and so protect them, right? But so there's factions, there's state actors, there's private business interests in terms of industrial espionage. Then there's just straight private interests, people who have the money to dabble and put together research committees and do stuff, right, or try to develop information and data. There are all kinds of factions involved here, and none of them. And then you have everybody that's for themselves. You have the researchers or the people that call themselves researchers as they're, racking up podium time and television hours. But you can't find the papers, you can't find the studies, and they don't meet research standards.
But you can, certainly hear a lot about the Nephilim, whatever. Whatever it is.
Oh yeah.
Or it's we're God's coming down from the spaceship, and our angels really demons, or you hear things, and I've been actually in the process of digitizing some things, and I am just stunned at some of the lectures that people are giving who are very prominent in the UFO field and have been for a long time. And they are, getting on there, and they're, mixing this religious, ideology with, there's a superior race and homosexuals are bad. And, all of this crap. Yeah. And it's like, whoa,
So this is one of my favorite things about ufology. It's an easy thing to kind of illustrate to the people, and that's that we project. We project our values, our ideas, our fears, our beliefs upon the unknown. It makes a perfect canvas because it's there but it ain't talking. So you can call it whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want about it. Nobody's going to contradict you. You know, I wrote a science fiction story about how in a post-contact world, certain individuals were visited and corrected for their adding to the confusion willingly. But, you know, fantasies aside, the patience to wait for real data isn't there. And there is real data. Things really happen. You know, for example, I got involved with this because I'd seen UFO close. Not UAP as NARCAP defined them originally. That term UAP came from NARCAP. But flying saucers, okay? And in 2015, I was at Kealakekua Bay in Hawaii. I had been told by a Hawaiian priestess who was a friend of mine, Haleaka Iolani Puli, it's her name. She said, and she keeps the great temple at Kealakekua Bay, and that's the bay where Captain Cook was killed. And there's a temple there, the Hikiau, which is a Heiau temple. It's a human sacrifice. It's one of 3 that are there. And I was one of her kahuna, which is an assistant to the priestess. And I'm not a religious man. She just roped me into it, and I told her I wasn't. And she said, "Come on, bro." So I helped anyway. And she found out I was a UFO guy. She said, "Brother, the UFOs, they come out of the water right over there. They hover over the pali, which is cliff in Hawaiian. They collect the mana, and then they go up the slope. They go Malka, which means upslope, and they disappear in the Keopuka up by Choice Mart. And right next to Choice Mart is a place called Keopuka Heights. And Keo means white, clear, invisible. Puka is whole, passageway, tunnel, gate. And Kealakekua means gateway of the gods. So archaeologists have their take on why it's all called that, but Aka said, this is why it's called that. This is the knowledge. This is what it really is. And then she died. She died in 2014. Well, 2015 in January, I'm sitting there at the temple at the Hikiau at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I look out to sea, and out of the water comes an orange ball of light. And it approaches and turns into a disc about 30 feet across. It was the size of a basketball held over my head. I don't know how big it actually was, but that was its size. And it came right to us. It was a disc inside of an orange ball of light. That ball of light was highly defined. It had a very distinct edge, a sphere of orange around it. And it looked like fluorescence. So what is the lesson here? Okay, there's knowledge to be had in all of this. That orange ball of light, most likely, my guess, is that the UFO is generating an RF frequency and causing fluorescence or ionization in the atmosphere in the helium band, because helium fluoresces and ionizes orange. So there's science. You want to go look at that and test it? Because now, if you know that, then you can listen for it in that RF frequency that triggers that ionization. Okay? And then you can predict it. It's coming. It's over there. You know, and that's science, that's research. Anybody talking about that from the podium? You know, is anybody, you know?
Well, no, because I mean, come on, we know what this is about, and I've got some questions in here in chat that I need to kind of to ask you, because you know, I mean, I know that
give me the top one. Give me the top one.
So the term UAP, you know, Bruce is saying in chat that, you know, the TTSA, or there was a show on, and they were basically claiming that the term UAP was something that they came up with, of course, or something to that effect. And then there are other people who are saying, no, the term UAP came from here or there. And so just clarify where that term came from and when it was really thrown into the picture.
Okay, so unidentified aerial phenomena is used as a catch-all phrase off and on in ufology, all right? But it was first defined in 1980 by Dr. Richard Haynes, our chief scientist. And in 1999, it was not common use in the vernacular at all. We brought it out there with our definition. And if you Google definition of UAP, you will find that story. It will take you right to our website. We've used that term. You can go back to 2000 and you can read blogger articles on how we changed the terminology on UAP. You can read Leslie Keene's article about how we introduced the term. It's our term. The researcher of the year probably should have known that before he tried to claim something that wasn't his.
You don't say. Right.
Meow. Was that was catty, wasn't it?
No, that's okay. I mean, it's true. It's just funny how people insert themselves into that, and
that's the story. Yeah, and that's the story though. That's where the term came from. I was on a train in 2000 in Leeds, England, coming back to London, and I had a stack of NARCAP documents on it, which I found myself sitting across from an RAF squadron commander who was going to Whitehall, and I promptly handed the whole stack to him. And then guess what comes out in 2006 that was written in 2001? Unidentified aerial phenomena in UK air defense zones, the Condign Report. And in it, they state that not only UAP exist, but they're likely a hazard to safe aviation. So influencing, right? Things happen, but that term, Dr. Haynes defined it when he was working with Dr. Hynek in the late 70s and early 80s.
And so what are your thoughts on Hynek?
Well, I've never read a bio of the man. Okay. I know what most people know, that he started out as more of a cynic, and became a level skeptic with, that was open to what potentials there were by the time he was done. And he certainly felt there was a there, and there was something to continue looking at. But that's science, and science is behind the observation. UFOs are not a scientific problem. They are if you want to prove that they exist. That's a scientific problem. But UFOs are not a scientific problem. They're a tactical problem. And you can't go whistling past the graveyard. You got to deal with it. There's something going on, and it may involve intelligences that are not our own, and they may not have our best interest in mind. I would doubt that anybody would travel all that distance and do all, and be what they are because they're worried about somebody else.
So let me ask you a question, because we've heard the the Skinwalker Ranch thing, and them saying that there's a threat, and that people have been hurt, and yada yada yada, and their portals opening up and closing over this specific area in Utah, and yet, and here's the funny thing to me, and yet there are airplanes flying over the ranch 24 hours a day. There's nobody's set up a guard. I mean, there are no guards around there except for the ones on TV. And so if that is, a threat, if there truly is a threat, and that's what they're presenting, then how much of a threat do they take this to be? Or is that just, again, another,
Well, this is my argument about ufology in general. If you really believe that there's an alien presence here on the planet, and you don't, and that its goals and ambitions are not understood and need to be, then how dare you stand up on a podium and just blather about nonsense? You know what I'm saying? If you really believe that's the case, do you respect the data? Do you respect the potentials? Or are you there to make yourself famous and stroke your ego? Or are you there to do something else? And the Skinwalker story in particular, you asked about Hynek. Hynek came up with a methodology called the strangeness factor. And it's a way of scoring and calculating a case to find out whether or not it lies kind of in the middle of ground of what people generally report, or whether it's outlier data. And there's nothing coming off of Skinwalker that's mainstream data. It's all outlier. And not only that, there's no data at all. But the descriptions of it have nothing to do with what the common UFO report is about. They're describing something else or nothing else. You follow what I'm saying there?
Absolutely.
And so, in the sense of, if it was real, you would expect some urgency.
Right.
And if it was real, or if there was obfuscation, then you've got other things to deal with. I don't chase Skinwalker around. I got my own places to go where I know UAP are seen, and I study and watch them. And and I try to work with people that seem to have a serious mind as far as research goes, and that are ethical, who won't reveal places that are important to Native people, or who will protect data because it's ethically appropriate to do so, because sometimes it is. And people who will stand by the work and respect the data, understand how important this is. I would really like to be wrong about UFOs and what they are, but I've seen them, and I can't deny what my own eyes tell me. All I can do is work, and to move in that direction and to help information development that'll get us there. People don't need my story. There are thousands and thousands of stories like mine and others. My story isn't important. I don't need to be believed, but I very much want to be one of the ushers moving us towards an answer of what this is about. I have no interest in being being famous and all of this. I just want to get to the bottom of it. I want to get the data, and I want to understand it. And there are people, very good minds, both credentialed and not, that are involved with this that feel the way I do, and those are the ones that I resonate with. And everybody else,
and I want to, and I mean, and I respect your drive and your passion to truly study this, and I want to, because I think for me this is important, and kind of I think there's a lot more to this, as we know over the years, just kind of talking about this and then coming up with ideas again. But when you had cases that came into NARCAP, where would the case first go? Do you remember? Okay, and I am going to actually, that is my cue right there. We're going to roll some music for I Just Lost Ted. It's just so interesting how this just happens every week, whatever. But I'm going to play some music, and we're going to get Ted back on the phone. And I want to just thank all of you for your great questions. Jeff, I'm going to talk about, in the next hour, I'm going to talk about databases and how information is acquired, where it goes, who has ultimate control of it. And I think this is going to be very, very important with regards to some of the research that I've been doing and the people involved and yada, yada. So we are going to take a little bit of a break. I'm Erica Lukes with UFO Classified. Go to UFOclassified.com to check up on things and to become a contributor, a person to help the show. I want to give a big shout out to Northern UFOs, who is also just always awesome in being here for me, and he really is my backbone with regard to all of this. So thank you, Mario, for everything you do. We're going to take a break. We will be back. Well, welcome back. This is UFO Classified. And you know what? It is never a dull moment when it comes to, well, my sound production staff, clearly me, because sometimes, the mic's on, sometimes the mic's off, but eventually we we will get it. And sometimes you get behind the scenes glimpses without me even knowing. So, I mean, what could be better than that? So my friend Ted Roe is on the horn again, and his call dropped, but he is back, and we are glad for that. Ted, are you there? Please tell me. Oh, praise the Lord. Yes, and let's continue.
So you were asking me about where a report goes when it came to NARCAP. Now we're talking about when Dr. Haynes was involved, and he hasn't been in 5 years. Okay, so that the protocols we use today are not the same, right? But at the time, everything went to Dr. Haynes, and then we had a group. He was the science director, so that's where it went. And then we had about 50 staff of technical specialists, research associates, and so on, and we try and pick who would be of help to divine whatever data it was that we were looking at, and then it may or may not end up being a report, like the O'Hare report we wrote, or Project Sphere, or something like that. But Dick made all of those decisions, and all the editorial decisions as well, and all the research standards and everything. and he versed me on them. And I got to say that, you know, a lot of what he told me was straight on, you know, way you would want it to be. And some of these things that he told me didn't quite add up to what I've learned later. And I found out that they're you know, the folks on the top of the pile here, for me, you know, I would never lie about data. I would never manipulate data. Why? Because I've had the bejesus scared out of me by the phenomenon itself. I wouldn't dare. I want to know what the answers are, and I don't want any muddy water. I want it to be clear. And most of these guys don't have respect for the data. They haven't had it chase them home at night. You know what I mean? They aren't operating with the proper respect for what the potentials might indicate. And
so right, and that I mean, and of course, like we said, that's why we know that they're not doing what they say they're doing. And so so the report would come in, and this is back when Haynes, you know, was involved. He was chief scientist for the organization. So the report comes in, and then what typically happened?
Well, you know, Dick was ever a skeptic, you know, in the sense of why did he get this report and who sent it to him and are they credible or not? And sometimes he'd shoot him down before we ever got a good look at him. And there was a time or two when I thought that was premature. And then other times he would just take it and kind of disappear, and then a report would come. And occasionally he generated reports that on cases that we actually didn't get a report on, that the data came to him from another angle, you know, and then it didn't come into the group as a direct report to the organization. It was through his network of friends and associates that he built over 40 years, which was quite formidable.
And so was there a database? I mean, how did, you know, like when you call MUFON or NewFork, I mean, you get in there, you submit the report, and then it goes into the database.
Dick kept a manual database. He called it AirCat, Air Catalog, and which was basically his life study on UAP cases that involved aircraft, and it's 40 years deep. There's 3,500 cases in it. All of that's at the repository at Rocky Mountain Repository at University of Wyoming. And I suppose that's probably, you know, it would have been really nice to have that in the public domain where people could get at it and use it. But it's right now the only people that can use it are the people who can afford to fly to Wyoming and spend weeks digging through his boxes. A lot of stuff there that's NARCAP oriented shouldn't be there. It should be with NARCAP. But again, we have problems with ethics here. The organization still exists. When the scientist quits, he doesn't walk away and take everything. You know, if the organization still exists, and we're a nonprofit, and we're here, and he's not, and he took a lot of his stuff with him, which is fine. We still have 50 papers we wrote. We've got tons of data of our own. Okay, but the database that those cases went in up to 2015 ended up in his AirCat and are squirreled away in Wyoming.
And so, who were the people? You know, I mean, he had these cases that he was obviously, you know, looking to his group of colleagues that he built over 40 years. He was working with them. Did he ever come to you and specifically say, "Hey, I'm bringing in this person to work on this case," or was it mostly he would just do that and then let you know?
Generally speaking, I oversaw all of the personnel changes. So anytime anybody was brought on board, I got introduced and I was asked whether or not they were welcome. You know, I had a say in the matter. I was the executive director.
Absolutely, right.
And you know, nine times out of 10, I'd sign off on it because they were his buddies. It was science, and frankly, I thought that being suspicious probably didn't help. You know, and that it was more important to not inhibit the work. I believed in Dick. I believed in the research that was going on. I believed in our mission in NORCAP, and there was no point in getting in the way of it. So most of the time when he brought people to us, I green-lighted them, whether they were short-term or long-term. There were some people that I absolutely put my foot down and said they're not staying. And and we had some problems with that I tended to prevail on, which I think is interesting. There are certain individuals well known to all of your listeners who I basically fired for serious conflict of interest and serious misbehavior.
Oh, how I wish we could go into the story.
well, and this is kind of my point, and this is why I conduct myself the way I do. I want the answers. I want to know about UFOs. I'm really getting tired of other people's agendas, and I'm getting really tired of other people's branding. What's really important here is being missed, and I want to advocate for that and work for that, which is an answer to what these things are and whether or not they're a threat. And I don't really have time or interest to associate with anything that's not doing that, other than looking out for my friends like you, because for some reason I have synchronicities with some of these individuals you've been dealing with that go back 35, 40 years. We were talking earlier, I met Bob and I was 26. Bob Bigelow. I was 26, and got a real good insight to the kind of person he is. And as soon as you could have pushed me over with a feather when I finally met him in Las Vegas. At his invitation, by the way, he invited Dr. Haynes and I to come to Las Vegas to his palatial estate and discuss NARCAP with him, as long as we paid for half the airfare.
Of course. Okay,
so if that gives you... So then I already got a bad taste in my mouth from that, but I went anyway because he's a billionaire, pardon my language. And but when I walk in there, you could have pushed me over with a feather because I knew who he was from 15 years before. And,
did he know? Did he make that connection? That he'd met you
no,
before?
He didn't. No. At least he didn't. No, he didn't. Not then. He probably has figured it out by now. But I had met him back then. I knew his deceased stepson, and I spent an evening at a dinner party where he was there with the woman who would be his wife, which was his dead stepson's mother, whose husband had a $4 billion inheritance in real estate in the balance. And so I already knew, and I told Dick, as soon as I saw the guy and we got out of his office, I told Dick, we can't go this way. There's no way. He's got a bad reputation anyway, but I got more to tell you. And so I explained it to him, and we didn't professionally as an organization associate, but Dr. Haynes was on Bigelow's committees, his research committees. Bigelow maintained chairs for a lot of the big names in ufology, and paid him a stipend to be available for consulting, and Dick was one of them. Bigelow tried to buy up everybody's data, including Dr. Haynes, and I came down real hard on that one. No, do not do that. And the offer was, if Dick wanted any of this, Dick would just turn over his files. If there was anything in there he wanted, he could photocopy it. And I was just like, hey, wait a minute. You're talking about a man's life work here. You want anything, you photocopy it. Just my own take on it. But I never had any interactions with Bigelow after that first meeting, and gladly so. And it's just an example of the kind of personalities in this field that when you get closer to them, you realize that, hey, it's not what you thought it was, or it's worse than you imagine. And he's just one example of a number of folks in this stance that are well known and may have contributed at one point and are just currently branding and steering a narrative that isn't helpful to those of us that really want to get an answer.
So what is it, with the data? Why? You and I have talked about this for years. It's like we can obviously see that there's a something going on. It's very clear by what we know. And the name of the game is data. And so we're sweeping it up. We are pushing it into a little dark hole. And why in the world is Bigelow so interested in abduction research and hypnosis, and now we've got the consciousness aspect creeping back into this again, and I mean, what is it with the data? Why would people be so interested in it? Is it simply because they're trying to, like, as the cover story would be, look for UFOs and then try to capture one and then reverse engineer this technology? Because, like, as I say that out loud, that just sounds so ridiculous. It kind of makes me laugh.
Well, you know, it does, but if you collect enough data, you might be able to understand something like, you know, what I was talking about, illumination on UAP here a little while ago. That's plasma physics, and you know damn well that there are only a few ways that you can generate plasma. One of them is RF frequency. Another one is atmospheric impact. Well, if the thing's only going 30 miles an hour, you know, that it's not ionizing because of that. It takes a huge amount of power to cause ionization. Okay, so there's all kinds of reasons to suspect, starting with the idea of looking at the illumination and what it is and what it isn't. So how come in 80 damn years we don't have any of that? You know, that's the questions I have. You know, why aren't people looking at this? Why aren't they looking at the variability in the reports in the shapes? Why am I writing a book on, or writing articles on the flight dynamics of UAP? You know, elementary physics around UAP movement, okay, which I published on an archive site here a few months back. That paper should have been written 50 years ago by somebody a lot smarter than I am. You know, but there it is. I wrote it because nobody else did. And now I'm writing on plasma and other stuff because nobody else is. And you know what? If somebody else sits up and decides to write about plasma and stuff too, that's great. We need 2 papers. You write one, I'll write one. Write one. Make it meet academic standards. Contact me if you want. I'll help you. I'll coach you. Or you can coach me, you know, whatever. But move something forward that's real. All this other stuff is not real. This is cloak and dagger, smoke and mirrors, obfuscation. It is not staying single purpose and focused on finding the facts. And you want to be entertained, that's great. I'm not here to entertain you. There's plenty of people that'll do that. You got Ancient Aliens, you got, you name it, it's all out there. I'm not here to entertain you. None of this information is about entertainment. And it's important. We all have children. I have a son. Do you know what it's like being a parent and seeing one of these damn things and having it confront you close up? You know, what that does to your sense of safety and order and reality. I had PTSD so bad, it took me years to get over it and to get myself centered on a rational and clear view of what's going on and what I know and what I don't know, and what's right and what's wrong about what's going on around me in the field.
So did Dick, because he knew how traumatic your experience was to you, I mean, did he step in and offer, I mean, did he give you the tools to cope with what you saw?
No, not at all. Dick is a perceptual psychologist. He was the first chief of the Space Human Factors Office at Ames Research Center. He very much involved in designing airborne and space-borne environments. Where do you put the buttons? Where do you put the knobs? Where do you put the windows? You know, all of that stuff. That's the psychology that Dick does. What Dick didn't appreciate was that he had met me within months of being exposed to this thing, and I went through a breakdown that lasted 15 years, 18 years of breaking down and fixating and compulsivity, just straight up PTSD. It complexed on other moments in my life when I wasn't safe, back when I was very young, and it carried a scar with me. It kept me from sleeping. It had me answering emails at 3 o'clock on Christmas morning for NORCAP. And it had me so reactive to any kind of a threat or any kind of a situation that was getting between going after the truth. I would confront it. I had to be, you know, stand up and say, hey, you can't hide behind an alias and abuse people. You know, not my fight, but he was doing it to me, so I did, and ended up in more crap over it. None of it has anything to do with UFO research. There's only one thing that has to do with that, and that's doing it. That's going and seeing it. That's gathering documentation. That's moving information and data, learning how to synthesize it into knowledge. That's what a science article is. It's, you gather data from disparate sources and you synthesize it into knowledge. And then other people look at it and decide whether you're on the right track or not. That's science.
Absolutely. And you know, and I'm sorry to keep going back to this, but I just think it's so critical for all of this, and I really appreciate you being so forthright with this. You know, when all of this was going on and he understood how you felt and the trauma that you experienced, because we know that he wrote a book on abductions and things. Did he recommend anybody that would, be a counselor or a hypnotist or anybody that, like that? Because...
Yeah. Well, here's what happened. I don't think Dick ever really understood that I had PTSD and that I was in bad shape. But a member of our staff did, and she was a psychologist, and ended up putting me through a lot of PTSD therapy, EMDR, other types of therapies that are associated with that. And she gave me 3-hour sessions twice a week for most of a year. And really that helped ground me. It was a grounding that I needed, whether I was scarred by UFOs or not. I was one messed up person, and it showed me where I was and what I needed to do in order to clear that up. And so I got to work on that. But in the process, I found out that this person had an agenda of her own. Told me she was in love with me at the end of it all, which just really broke me. It was, everything costs, there's a price for everything. And for me to get clearer and understand it, I had to be associated with people on every level that were in it for themselves.
So Dick recommended this person. What do you feel that what were the things that were taking place in your sessions? Do you think that those were shared with Dick and his colleagues potentially?
Yeah, I do. And that was all part of it, that there were problems there of all kinds that that shouldn't have been discussed, and that I came to realize that, this has all been a realization that nobody's in it. Nobody has my best interest in mind in this field. I got to look out for myself, and it took me, that seems like a given, but it's not, Just a second, I have to yell at my dogs.
Yeah, and I know, I want to say, first of all, I'm seeing a lot of great comments in chat. It's like, thank you, Ted, for, putting this out there and exposing yourself, because this obviously, this has not been easy. This path for you, the initial experiences and then getting involved with all of this, and then at the end of the day, understanding that maybe these people that you had associated with didn't necessarily have the greater good in mind, because they weren't looking at what they should be looking at, and that breaks my heart. I know that people that are listening to this are feeling the same way as well.
My thanks to people that understand what it is I'm trying to say, because I'm not trying to demonize anybody. Dr. Haynes made some terrific contributions to this field. He wrote a book, UFOs and the behavioral psychologist. He made contributions, scholarly ones, and some of his case analysis was really, really good. There's a lot of good things to say about it, but I'm just telling you that that's the old guard. Dick had never seen a UFO of his own. He'd never been confronted by one himself. And in the end, like I said, the respect for the data, it wasn't really there. And it wasn't just Dr. Haynes, it was everybody. I have said over and over again that getting involved with ufology was the worst thing that I ever did. It was by far the worst thing that I ever did. And if I'd have known then what I know now, I never would have done it. I never would have brought my story into this. And I certainly wouldn't have. I would have tried to find some help somewhere, but I basically you know, I threw myself right in the middle of it and ended up studying with the best known minds in the field, and they've all contributed to a point. But in the end, here we are 80 years, and we aren't any closer to understanding the phenomena than we were when in the 40s. So, you know, that it's important to get that. And then it might be also important to understand that a lot of these people work for a lot of different people. Dr. Haynes worked for a lot of different people in the UFO field. He had many, many contacts in the field and outside of it that were UFO related. I only know about a few of them. And, you know, he had a clearance. He's classified. You know, he could only talk about some things and not others. And same with a lot of people on our staff. So the bottom line is that those factions are there. It's obvious. I mean, you wouldn't, you know, if you got to watch what you say, then obviously something's going on. And but ufology in its current incarnation is, in my opinion, is a waste of time. We don't, you know, field investigation and all that stuff is really good, but we've got tons and tons and tons of cases. We got tons of data. What we really need is scholarly engagement on multidisciplinary approaches to the ideas of UAP and ET incursion and social psychology and so on. The topics are endless, and we need a current body of works in that area, completely divorced and separate from whatever ufology is entertaining itself with today.
And so how do you do that when, I mean, clearly, you know, we've demonstrated that what has taken place with this topic and people getting data and people kind of throwing up landmines with regard to all of this. I mean, how do you get to a truly good case? How do you get that to a good person that is going to investigate it and then put that forward? Because it seems to me like right now it's just it's where do you turn? Because obviously nobody that we can think of that is held in high esteem in the UFO world can be trusted to do anything like that. So how do you go about it?
Well, what you do is you accept that they aren't the end of the world in terms of, you know, who's thinking about this and who's talking about it. There are academics. I mean, there are people who've lived their whole lives in the Star Trek generation, and they're dweebs, they're nerds, they're scientists. You know, they're of that ilk, right? And yet they have imaginations and fantasy, and some of them have seen UFOs. In other words, don't sell good minds short. Present data that they can use, and it's there. And it doesn't have to be with a new case. Again, like I said, a paper on illumination would take you a long way. And I'm working on one. A discussion. You know, there are all kinds of things that, you know, what a conference really is. You know, what a symposium really is an opportunity for good minds to get together and break out. They present their data, and then they disappear into rooms, and they all cluster around and throw all their stuff on a table and start talking about it.
So
That's
so
not
you
what
mean
happens.
it's not about hearing about Rendlesham 20 years in a row? I mean, it's not about the cult of personality and who's signing whose book and
No.
you know, who's going off into whatever conference room to get hypnotized and told that they're, you know, part of the Palladian Space Brother Association here from. Okay, well, you completely ruined my image of a conference. What?
I'm very sorry, you know, but that, you know, it took me a while to learn that, but that's the case, you know. So where are people getting together and breaking out their data and coming up with new knowledge and new information? Because I don't see it happening here in this country, and I don't see conferences in general happening much anywhere else. So how do you do it? Like you said, how you do it? Well, if you go back and you take a look at science and the claims that science is reluctant to look at UFOs, it's not reluctant to look at UFOs. That's the first misunderstanding. It's not reluctant to look at them. Got something to present? Can you write it in a way that's readable and that gives a rational thinker something to chew on? You know, or do you just shove a video in front of them and demand their opinion and then declare that science doesn't give a shit because here's these videos? You know, yeah. Example, the Pentagon videos, right? Well, we got stacks of stuff from the government when they gave us Project Blue Book. They gave us 12,000 cases of photographs and sketches, and it involved everybody from car washers to government scientists and war heroes, all in there, big pile of it, 12,000 of those darn cases, right? And then you've got these 3 cases from the Pentagon, and everybody's just hanging on that like that's something. And when you look at the cases themselves, all you have is the video. There is no write-up on it. I think there was an attempt at a write-up by SCU at one point, and they published that under their own thing. I didn't get very far into that study. I had hopes for better when I read it, but it was something. Anyway, it was an attempt. But bottom line is that those cases are not lead pipe cinch alien craft. The reason it doesn't work is for a couple of reasons. It's the sources, and it's the way the information was put out there to begin with. Now, if somebody had taken those studies and written them up and shown without any freaking doubt that those things are technologies and that they're devices and so on, and wrote an actually, a solid paper on the subject, and then got the darn thing published somewhere, that would be of value. It's the first thing I ask whenever somebody puts a video in front of me. I don't care where it comes from. Anybody write anything up on it? Is there something I can review? Those videos, the gimbal video in the Pentagon series, first crossed my desk in 2007. And I was told at that point that it was a Pentagon video, and would NARCAT be interested in working on it. And so I started digging around and looking, and I ended up in the back of a German animation website. It was sitting in a folder in the back of a German animation website, which didn't bode well. And then I thought about it some more and talked to Dr. H about it, and Dr. Haynes, and my concern was our exposure. How do we explain that we have a Pentagon video? How do we take this on? We all agreed we couldn't, so we didn't. But there were a lot of questions about this thing when it first crossed our desk. It wasn't new. That video has been in circulation for years.
So how did it, if you can tell me, how did it first cross your desk?
It just showed up in email. Somebody sent it to me. Hey, you should take a look at this. This video is a Pentagon video, and, but it came from just an anonymous email address, It wasn't any particular researcher that sent it to me. I get stuff like that from time to time, and I do follow up on all of them because sometimes they're military or government, and they have to be circumspect in their way they go about doing it. But
and so, do you think somebody was trying to give you stuff? Like I've had, I've had instances where people have approached me and tried to, gain my friendship and trust, and then they've given me information that they were hoping I would leak, or documents that they would hope I would leak, and to further their narrative, or to confuse the subject, or to damage my reputation, or yada, yada, yada.
Or damage your rep.
Yeah. And so, do you think that there could have been some of that involved, especially if it was questionable and this is something that allegedly came out of the Pentagon, which would be, Yeah, it would be a crime to possess. Right. Okay, and particularly at that time, if it was what it was, guys in suits would be knocking on my door, and which is all well and good, as it should be. I think that like I said, there are factions in here, and they're trying to do stuff all the time. I had, not very long ago, I had a photograph sent to me with an elaborate story written around it, and I debunked it rather soundly. It was the photograph of the reflection of a ceiling lamp. And there was a big story about how the guy's daughter had been out with her iPad and taken a picture of the thing hovering out over the ocean, and that not only was it a ceiling lamp, I was able to find the make and model in the place you could order it from, and I ran it through a couple of filters so that you could see it really well, but it was pretty obviously a light mounted on a ceiling. Why did he send that to me? Trying to trip me up? Because that,
and other things will trip you up, just in the course of doing them. There are things that just happen. For example, I had a Serbian pilot contact me with video of a UAP that he said approached their aircraft and then did a 180 and then went back, and you can hear the pilots screaming in fear. They thought it was a missile attack, and the whole way it came up, it looked really good. It looked like a super good case. So I wrote it up, and I came up with basically that what we were looking at was technology that had a plasma around it, and that that it looked like a safety hazard and so on. And what it turned out to be was the one of the stages on a SpaceX rocket, the Falcon 9, and and as soon as I published the paper, literally within a day at the most, I was getting feedback, right? That was, and people were saying, "Hey, this is this looks a lot like a Falcon 9 booster," and I dug in, and it was. So I went and I found Jim Oberg. He had written a paper on it and linked out to that to make sure that that people were steered correctly on that case. And then I got a hold of the witness and explained what it was to him, and he was astounded because they believed that this thing was very near their aircraft, and it was actually miles and miles above them. It was just terribly bright. And it was a Falcon 9 stage, and it was coming up, and then it turned around and boosted back to Florida. And they were in southern France heading into Spain, so they were in this angle where the apogee was. They were right under it. So you get this kind of stuff too, where people aren't trying to trip you up. It's just. I mean, I was right. It was tech. It just wasn't a UAP. So you clean that up the best you can. But there are other situations where people are truly trying to mess you up. And O'Hare was a good example of that. I did the photo analysis for the O'Hare case, and we didn't receive any photos that I was willing to put my name on. We got a lot of doctored photographs, a lot of photos that I was able to find online that people had just copied and sent to us, and they put a UFO with it. Found some way to do some digital wizardry, and they were truly trying to mess us up. And in the end, my conclusion was that there were no credible photographs of the O'Hare UAP presented to us. And that's the way we wrote it.
And that was such an interesting case for multiple reasons. I mean, you had so many witnesses. You had, you had the fact that all of the information seemed to have been vacuumed up pretty quickly. And then, I remember hearing back after that case kind of broke, or whatever, the story broke, that Dan Aykroyd had purchased all the rights to all of the photos and videos and things. And what did you ever hear about that?
Well, I'd heard that Dan was taking a jump into it, and I'm a cynic when it comes to personalities, and I wasn't very kind to Tom DeLonge, and I wasn't terribly kind to Dan Aykroyd either. When you had the bejesus scared out of you by these things, you just don't really want to suffer fools. You just don't really want to put up with the posturing and the branding and all the rest of this stuff. This is way more important than that, and I just don't really have a lot of empathy or respect for those types of maneuvers, those kinds of people. So
why would a case like O'Hare, why would that just be? I mean, why would all the information on it be swept up?
Well, it was an incursion into Class B restricted airspace that involved qualified witnesses, and it presented a hazard and a safety hazard, and it would create a hell of a dialogue if the thing got out of control. So you don't want anybody talking about that, so you suppress it. The idea that there's something hanging in airspace, that pilots are landing and taking off, and they don't know if it's going to stay where it is or if it's going to drift into their path. Everybody says, well, UFOs will get out of the way, Well, that doesn't mean you won't crash your plane anyway. You don't know what that thing's going to do. It has no way of telling you what it's going to do. And even if it isn't a natural phenomenon, it's a technical device and it's occupied and the people in it want to live, it's not communicating. It's not available. It's not accessible. As you're coming in, and you only have moments as a pilot. Everything's got to be right. The landing phase is particularly important. You're holding your airspeed under 170 miles an hour, but you're staying in the air, and the plane is slowly falling out of the sky, and you're aiming your wheels at the runway and making sure that you're ready for your flare out so you can drop in those. And in the middle of all this, here comes a 30-foot disc. And I would think the authorities wouldn't want that going anywhere. They could help it.
And so can you, describe, because, there's some, we've heard of the O'Hare case and, yada, yada, but then it happened a while ago. And so what were the specifics? How close was this object to the airport? And also, what happened? Just give us a little background on this case, because it really was interesting for multiple reasons.
November 6, 2006, ramp crew that were shuttling aircraft. Our volcano has erupted, so I'm starting to get aircraft over my property here from time to time. So anyway, November 6, ground crews and air controllers that were shuttling, ramp controllers that were shuttling aircraft on the ground around C terminal at O'Hare reported a disc hovering above C terminal. Estimated 800 to 1,200 feet above the ground, give or take. And the ramp controller gets on the horn and calls the tower, tells them that the guys are reporting it on the ground and that somebody photographed it, which we never saw. And the incident lasted about 20 minutes. The thing was there, and there was dialogue on it, and then it boosted through the clouds and left a nice circular little hole when it left in the clouds. And if you go look at the Shulgin memo or the early memos of the U.S. Air Force and their intelligence requirements on flying discs, they mention punching holes in the clouds as a specific phenomenon. Now, remember that, and remember my story about seeing the round sphere of light around the disc here in Hawaii. That very defined round ionized circle. Okay, so is that science? Is there something to look at? But anyway, that was the O'Hare case. It was a hazard in Class B restricted airspace. We didn't find a lot of data to support it. We had witness testimony, but we didn't find much radar work. We had Martin Show work on the radar. He's a very good guy. We tried looking at different radar facilities around the O'Hare reservation there that might have picked up anything, and we didn't find anything that was conclusive. I wrote about this in my pilot advisory that these things are intermittently detected on radar, and it should be considered a characteristic that sometimes you can get them and sometimes you can't. Doesn't mean they're not there, much like stealth aircraft. It's just there are times when you can pick them up and times when radar won't detect them.
And you mentioned Martin, and I just want to throw this in there because I think this is interesting. He actually helped me on a case. There was a mass daytime sighting here in the Salt Lake Valley, and that made the news, and it was seen. There were 5 to 7 different objects, the metallic whitish spheres that hovered, that people got photos of, that people were witnesses were talking about, and I went on scene and interviewed multiple witnesses that said that the sounds in the area where the objects were hovering seemed to just stop. And it was like this cone of silence. So I got the radar, asked the FAA for the radar data, and twice I got back unreadable information. And Martin Show was one, again, with William Puckett, who was very great in the American Airlines case, which all about.
Bill was an RCAP guy too. So was Martin.
Yeah, so these are great guys, and it was interesting with that case, and I'll have to talk about that. I'll have to bring you back on and then talk about those cases. But I just wanted to say Martin is incredible at what he does, and it is interesting. And back to the O'Hare case. Sorry to get a little off track, but it's just that was a fascinating case, and I definitely think that was our technology at the end of the day. But with the O'Hare case, could there have been the potential that whatever was being witnessed was perhaps from either our government, or this was some sort of it was an outside, some incursion from another from an adversary?
Anything I suppose is possible, but I don't think so. That whatever that was operated on the same principles that I defined in my paper on flight dynamics of UAP. It went from a dead hover to an explosive acceleration. It had no aerodynamic lifting bodies. It had no thrust ports. It left no heat signature. It made no sound. We don't generally have aircraft that function that way. Yes, I know there are magnetohydrodynamics and other kinds of things out there. But my first guess is that this is consistent in every way with every other disk report we've ever had. That involved the description of a disk as the UAP. Now, whether or not our adversaries or America could replicate that or something that looks like that, maybe. The question is, why would they, if they had that capacity and that it was so capable of doing that, why would they float it out over an airfield? And how come there hasn't been any real
What better way to
like
test something?
Well, you can test it anywhere. They got warehouses they can test them in. They don't have to.
Yeah, but if you want to get the real time kind of thing,
They used to fly them out of Area 51 on Thursday night, and you could go park out there and watch the darn things. The ones that they were testing that worked that way, that had those types of flight dynamics.
But, it's funny because you hear the drones. You hear all about drones and how now they are a serious threat to aviation safety, and how whoever these mysterious, different people from different parts of the country are flying these drones dangerously close to, to aircraft and things. And so, could there have been, something like that? I'm not saying that's what O'Hare was, but it just so many.
I think November 2006 PD pre-drone versus post-drone, right? I think that the water is more muddied as time goes on. We did some studies on drones, and I'm constantly looking at the new regulations that come out on drones to understand lighting and the lighting requirements and so on for them to, and operating requirements, because you need to understand that if you want to be able to, correctly assess a case, whether it's a drone or not. And as time goes on, it gets harder and harder, and eventually we have personal flying vehicles coming online. We've got all kinds of different things that are going to be in the air, so we really need to understand them and not let them pollute the data as far as understanding the truly unusual stuff.
And that's the thing, and that's so difficult. And people say, well, Valet, has said that these are one step ahead of us, and different researchers have said they're one step ahead of us, and so, which of course you would hope an advanced civilization would be many steps ahead of us. But what if just saying that these things are one step ahead of us is actually just a cover for our own technology?
It well could be. There are all kinds of games played around this information because people see all kinds of things, and some of them are government things and some of them are not. And we want to not only keep our own people guessing, but we want to keep our adversaries guessing. Ben Rich comes out at Skunk Works and say, yeah, we've done this, we've been there, blah, 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 and all. Do you think our adversaries can make sense out of that one way or the other? They don't know, what I'm saying, but it just makes it all harder for people who don't know what's going on at the Skunk Works to figure it out, right? It's obfuscation. And I think that there's a lot of that going on. And we have all kinds of flying platforms that are used or obsolete or only used sometimes, or operate on bizarre principles, and they've been tested, but they're not generally used. This kind of thing. There's all of that sitting around, all of that hardware. But I know what I saw. It was less than its own length from the windshield of my car, and I saw its crew.
And people.
It wasn't just a step ahead of us, Erica. Okay, and I'm actually writing up this observation. I've never actually talked about any of my experiences before, but I'm writing up this observation because there's information in it that would be interesting to somebody who wanted to look further in the field, because it involved all kinds of things, temporal effects, and you name it.
And so, and I know you've briefly kind of touched on your sightings, your experiences before on the show, but I have people in the chat room who are wanting you to talk about it. Would you be willing to share some of those details?
Yeah. Is there a case in particular? I mean, I've talked about two of them today, the Oakland case and then the one here in Hawaii.
So the Oakland case, and the case where you were specifically seeing up close and personal the occupants of the craft.
Okay. So basically, I'm with two of my friends, and we're driving southbound on 880 South in Oakland. We're up near El Cerrito, coming down from San Pablo, which is where I lived at the time. I know, I'm sorry. And as we were coming down, we came to the Bay Bridge interchange, and we wanted to stay on 880 South, so we weren't going to cross the Bay Bridge into San Francisco. We were going to continue southbound. And at the time, because of the Loma Prieta earthquake 9 years before, they were rebuilding where the Cypress Freeway used to be. So the new freeway makes a big wide loop, and your listeners could probably get on Google Maps and look at Oakland and see what I'm talking about. It makes a big curve, and then it goes parallel to the estuary on one side and the city of Oakland on the other, and then it heads straight on down south towards San Jose and the South Bay. And so we picked this. We're at the interchange, choosing to go southbound, and I look to my left, and there's a freeway with MacArthur Boulevard and all that stuff exit right there on our left. And I look out towards MacArthur, and hovering is an odd light, a yellow light over a white light. And it looks weird. Sue's driving. My friend Ian's in the back seat. I bored these people to death with UFOs for years and how I'd had experiences and blah, 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 because I'm compulsive and unfit for humans a lot of the time. And I leaned around Susan and I said, now that's unusual. And everybody turned and looked, and this yellow light and a white light, we were watching it, and then it turned, it rotated, it became a rectangle over two white lights, a yellow rectangle over two white lights that were spaced just maybe a quarter of the way in from each end. These lights were blisteringly bright. And so we're heading westbound before we make the curve near the Army Depot. And this thing is going parallel to us and about 2 miles away. It's over Highway 24 and heading down the Highway 24 thing. And we make the curve, and at that point, 880 South starts to rise up onto pylons as you head into Oakland. And right there at the Oakland entry is the Highway 24 interchange, which is an overpass that comes down onto 880 South. And as we were making the curve, and the Oakland federal buildings are right next to that freeway curve, and they're quite distinct. They're identical buildings. They're fairly new, and they have a walkway between them at 10 stories or something like that. So they're kind of a landmark. And this thing stopped between us and the Oakland federal buildings, and as the car came around, it was facing the federal buildings directly. Everything was framed. I've done the math and the calculations, so I know that we were almost exactly a mile away from this thing. And I'm looking at it, and Ian and I had gone through this whole list of things it wasn't. It wasn't an airplane on fire heading to the bay. It wasn't a helicopter. There's just all this crap that it wasn't. And as I'm looking at it, I'm realizing I'm seeing silhouettes. I'm seeing figures in this thing. And I started to squint and say, what am I looking at? And all of a sudden, this thing just leaped. And it went so fast that I couldn't hold visual resolution on it. It was like it stopped. It moved so quick that my eyes just froze a couple of frames. And so I saw it when it first started, and then I saw it close and then closer. And then it came to a dead stop right in front of our car, less than its own length away. And the whole movement was faster than I could have blinked. It was very, very quick. So it stops directly in front of the car, and then proceeds to match our speed. We're doing 55 or so in the opposite direction. It's facing us broadside, right? And 8-10 feet off the ground. It's maybe 10-12 feet thick. Maybe it's about a 5-to-1 cylinder. The tube, and it had a deck in it. The whole one side of it was transparent. You couldn't see through it, but it was transparent from one end to the other and from top to bottom. You could see the deck they were standing on. You could see the void underneath the deck. You could see everything in the thing, all of it. So got a real eyeful. And Susan, ever the champion, she's driving and she's looking at this. She's all white-knuckled because they're right in front of the car. And she says, "Ted, are those?" Meaning, Ted, are those aliens? And I kind of blurted out no because I've got trauma. And I started sliding down in the seat and looking at it. And the one in the middle cocked his head and looked at me. There was three of them. They were standing shoulder to shoulder. They had their hands on a panel. And one of them, there was a heads-up display on the wall between me and the one on the far right, my right. And he had his hand up and he was tapping away at something that was going on the wall there. And they had this kind of like a little panel that was out of the wall in front of them. And I could see him in silhouette and everything. And Sue says, "Ted, are those aliens? Meaning, are those aliens?" And I blurt out no. And then the thing moved to our right, and then it turned, and so it was flying right next to us on the right-hand side of the car, and 15 feet away or so. I mean, I didn't want to look because the guy was standing right there looking back at me. I did not want to look out of the side of the car, and then all of a sudden it was dark. It was like. This was evening. It was about 4:30 in the evening when the first observation happened. The whole length of the observation involved about 4 miles, and we were doing 55 the whole time through it. Okay, so this thing moves up next to the car, right, and all of a sudden it's dark, and I have this weird moment, and next thing I know, we passed the Oakland police station. We were a little further down where the Jackson Street exit is, and I kind of rallied. I looked over at Sue. I said, "What time is it?" She said, 7:34. So over 3 hours had passed in the time that it took us to drive 1 mile in 1 minute and 5 linear seconds, 65 seconds or so. We experienced 3 hours. And I believe it was because we were in proximity to this thing. It has a zone of influence around it. When you get too close to it, that happens. The vehicle was big enough to put us in it. I mean, they could have taken the car. And we both turned to Susan early in the thing and told her to stop the car. And she says, "No, if they're going to take us, they got to take us while we're moving." And again, Susan is ever on the defensive, alpha, just remarkable responses that I wouldn't have. If anything, I would have tried to kick out the back window and yank the shotty out of the trunk and lay down suppressing fire. It's not my first rodeo with these guys, but they absolutely terrify me.
And you're telling me this, and you're reminding me of a case that Junior Hicks had up in the Uinta Basin, and and I'll have to talk about that on another show because we're running out of time. But yeah, just the beings looking back at you. After this happened, were there any physical effects on any of you?
Well, other than the temporal effect, there's more to the story, but it left, okay, and we watched it leave, and I saw some other technology. I watched the thing kind of cloak itself rather convincingly, and a couple of other things. But as far as actual direct physical effects, other than the temporal effect and a little bit of nausea and disorientation, I was really screwed up. I couldn't figure out what happened, because 3 hours went by and we didn't drive more than a minute. What happened? How come it just suddenly got dark? And I mean, it got dark like that, and our clock, the clock in the car documented the time had passed, so the whole thing to me was just a real mind buster, and the real effects on it were psychological. We were going to some friends, we were having a gathering, and we were going down there to meet them, and I found my friend in the back that was in the back seat in one of the bedrooms staring at the floor, and he was an absolute wreck. He was not okay with it. Never has been, never went close to the UFO subject, disappeared out of my life fairly shortly afterwards. Susan, on the other hand, has been a wingman with me while I've gone through all of this stuff for years, and we've had experiences since, and she's been present for some. She's had a couple on her own. So we don't really know what it's all about or why it involves specific individuals, but I would never stand on a podium and tell anybody that it's a good thing or that I understand it, because I don't. And it's disingenuous and wrong to do otherwise, or to try and make something out of yourself because you had this happen to you. You know,
so was there a communication between you and the entities?
Yeah, you know, I wouldn't say so, no.
Okay.
Maybe body language, that head cocking was rather telling. And so, it was like he could hear me.
And so, you know, when you approached Haynes and things and you told him about this, what were some of the questions that he was most interested in asking you about it?
Wanted to know if there was any effects on the car running, and wanted to look at the car. Wanted to know about just generalities between us. He wanted to talk to each of us and what our perceptions were. And, you know, we didn't tell quite the same story. Susan seemed to think that the incident started earlier than it did, and it took me actually drawing it out on a map and showing it to her, and then to get her then she recanted her perspective, that she realized that I had documented it well, but we weren't on the same page on every detail. But he took time with all of us, and then I asked him what was going on with it, and he said the investigation's ongoing, and I never heard another word out of him. I asked him repeatedly about my own experience and about others. I had specific questions, very specific questions, and all I ever got out of Dick was a shrug. There was no support in there, you know, as far as dealing with this or understanding it or anything. It was just what I could do for the organization.
So did anybody else that was associated with his group of people, did they ever ask you about it? No, not really. No, I told the story. I was a nervous wreck. I told it to everybody that listened to me. You know, there are times when I still do that even now when I'm in an anxiety cycle. But nobody in the organization took any interest in me. They were very concerned with being associated with the names and the faces, with Lee and Haynes and the Big Shot. And I dealt with them every day. I gave them yearly reports. I dealt with them constantly. Okay, and so I wasn't starstruck, other than just in the beginning. And then when I started actually learning their strengths and their weaknesses, then it got harder. And I'm going to just share with your listeners one weakness, okay? This is the kind of thing that I dealt with. I started getting emails from Chilean Air Force generals in 2010 proposing that we set up a research agreement with the government of Chile. And so I started working with them and coming up the wording and getting everything together so I could make a proposal to our advisory committee. I was doing my job as an XO. And when I got all this together, and I told Dick about it after I'd been working on it for a couple of months. Just a second. Hey, simmer. And I told him, I said, Dick, I think we're almost there. I want you to look over the wording of this agreement and tell me if this is right. And if it's all good, I'm going to go ahead and sign the research agreement with these guys. And I got a tone out of him. I got this kind of, when I said I was going to sign the research agreement with him, I got this kind of weird energy out of him. And then it was coming to the holidays. It was Thanksgiving, and there was a kind of a pause. And I was doing things at the Chilean base, which is slower than the Americans and more professional. And so I was making sure that we were synchronized with the way they think and the way they do things. And they give time between their communications, so we give time between ours. So Thanksgiving came, and I took my Thanksgiving holiday. And then Dr. Haynes contacted them and told them I was dead. Told them I was dead and that he would handle signing the agreement, which he did. These are the kinds of things that are standing in the way of us getting to the truth about UFOs and ufology. Now, I adore Dick. I've known him for like I said, 20 years, and I had a lot of respect for him all along.
But that's how low it goes with people that you respect in this field. And unless you're willing to take those kinds of hits and that level of betrayal and worse, don't come into this. I never should have. I never should have got involved in this. And I'm doing absolutely the best I can to do right by it for the few that recognize what right is, you know, and share a common vision of that with me. But I have no interest in ufology. I have no interest in any of the rest of the nonsense out there. I have their numbers, and I want to get to the truth of all of this. I don't want to further this morass of this failure. You know, I want to get us to something that makes sense.
Well, and I've always, you know, respected that about you, and I've seen, you know, because we've had so many conversations and how personal this is, and how you are doing this because you want the answers, and I'm here for that same reason too, because this has affected both of us personally, and then you get pulled into it, and then you get surrounded by these people and players and things that have their own agendas, and that really is such a it's sad.
It's dark.
It is dark.
It's
It
dark.
is very dark.
It's dark.
Absolutely.
And in some cases it's dangerous and threatening, and I don't have to tell you that. Okay, there is some real bad news in all of this. Some of this leads to death threats and worse. And I just, you want to be very careful about what you're doing here. You really want to try and know the lay of the land before you get on it. You want to make sure that your allegiances and alliances are well thought out, and that you're sensitive enough that if they aren't working for you, you break them off before they do damage. You have to be an XO. You got to be a professional, an actual real professional. And in this field, it's the Wild West. Nobody is. And the people that bring professional standards to this study are going to be the ones that make changes in it. Everybody else is just entertaining each other and here for the ride.
Yeah, you know, that is, yeah. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it's like how, you know, I think both of us understand that people have had experiences that are very real to them, and they deserve to be treated with respect. And so many times
the best effort should be made. The best effort should be made to help them, which is to resolve this. You know, not aggrandize yourself. You know, not pursuing hero worship, but actually getting. You want to be compassionate. Help those of us that have had these experiences resolve them.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is the role of what, you know, science should be, people that are engaged in this and not playing games and not hiding data and doing specific things like that. And I just want to say, because your statement about what Haynes did as far as saying that you were dead, why? I mean, what were his motivations, if you don't mind talking about that?
The only excuse I can offer was professional jealousy. He wanted to be the one that signed the paper. To him, that was the first that any UFO group ever had made an official research agreement with a government, and he was all hung up on that. It wasn't good for us. It wasn't a good relationship. It wasn't a good agreement. The agreement was good, but the way it played out wasn't. And as an XO, my responsibility is to keep my organization alive, functional, and healthy. And the stuff that isn't healthy, my job is to go after it. And that relationship wasn't healthy for our group. And I wasn't there to be a big shot. I was there to win. And if we want to win, you get rid of the stuff that's hurting you. And that agreement wasn't good for us. But I couldn't get people to take that seriously because they were too busy enjoying being a big shot.
And so when you found out that had happened, what did you do? I mean, I don't even know what I would have done.
Well, that was just it. I was completely. I mean, I'd had problems with Dick before, to the point of actually writing a couple of resignation letters and kind of writing them out as I was watching, because I was hoping that things would level out. And then this happened, and man, I didn't talk to him for about 6 months, and I just sat with it, and I didn't let him assign anybody else to my position. I maintained my control in the organization because I owned it I own NARCAP. I filed all the papers and everything. It's all mine. It was mine from day one because Dick had made it very clear that he didn't want to be associated with any of the financials or anything. He just wanted to do the research, and that somebody needed to own the company, so I did. And
so when you say that the information collected during the NARCAP time was not sent to you when you were...
Yeah, it wasn't shared. And that's you can make a lawsuit out of it. You can do whatever you want. Again, these are the kinds of things that they're insights into the people. Again, I believe that the NARCAP mission was bigger than Dr. Haynes. And I believe that what we were trying to do could make change and could be influential. And I was willing to suffer indignities at his hands and others, whether it was intentional or otherwise, to see that mission move forward. Again, the mission is more important. And that's why I stayed. But it didn't do my morale any good. It certainly didn't do the organization any good. I mean, a lot of your viewers don't know this, but I spent about 5 years being homeless and running NARCAP out of a laptop under a tree. Okay, and we still stayed ahead of the game and contributed in a big way, to the field. I've been all around this whole study in terms of dealing with NARCAP and keeping it all alive, and I do, because the mission's more important than Dr. Haynes, and it's more important than me. And if one airliner has one savvy pilot on it that sees what's coming and does the right thing and puts it behind him and doesn't crash his plane, then we've done our job. In that sense. So it's worth staying in the game just for that. But it's more important than that. And you'll notice that when Senator Warner stood up in the Capitol steps there, he talked about UAP and aviation safety. And that's because of NARCAP. That's not because they arrived on that subject on their own. They chose our term, and they chose the aviation safety issue because we've been involved with them and talking about it and pushing that. It's the reason we took the aviation safety angle even to begin with was that along with believing that there was a safety problem, was that we really felt that if we could influence the aviation system, we could change the whole field, all of ufology. If we could get the aviation system to start taking this seriously, then we could get off the high center or out of this logjam and start get the data moving and start actually getting somewhere. And so that was our approach, and it gave our politicians and managers and everything else a way to talk about it without having to talk about the doom of the world and little gray aliens. And so, hey, you want to call it an aviation safety problem? Great, just look at it, okay? But that's progress. That was a good thing. That was NARCAP. The fact that the term is out there, or the fact that they're discussing it as couching it in aviation safety terms, that's NARCAP. Glad of it. It's influence, and there's more, But those are the directions we need to go in if we're going to influence people. That's the influence you want. You don't want them. I don't need Senator Warner to know my name. I need him to know what's in my pilot advisory.
And how do you go about that when you've got all of these people that are posturing, that are the same old players, that are trying to line their pockets, and muddying the water? I mean, that's the infuriating thing when you see the fact that, yeah. But that's another show for another day, because we've got to wrap it up and things.
All right.
But you know what I mean? There's this, and that's why I guess to me it's so important to shine a light
we were successful.
On
Erica, we were successful though. We were successful. He used our term. He used our focus. Okay? You can. How do you do that? Well, we did it. All right? We did it by staying focused on the subject. We did it by picking an angle that it could be approached without having to trigger the fringe in order to talk about it. We did it a number of different ways, and that's our influence, and it helped. It made a difference. And they know who we are. Believe me, they know who we are. And I have interactions, okay? So let's just let it go at that, because, again, this isn't about me, and it isn't about what's going on. It's about solving the damn problem. And I just want to do that. That's all I want to do, is I want to understand who the hell those guys were, what the hell they were flying, where the hell they came from, and what their plans are. That matters to me more than anything. And if I can help my government in the process and help the aviation system in the process, hooray. NARCAP isn't my only game. I do a lot of other research that has nothing to do with NARCAP. And I have projects that are not related to NARCAP that are rewarding and I think helpful.
Absolutely.
And if there's anybody out there that wants to play, you can reach me through NARCAP, info@narcap.org. If you've got information or you want to be involved or you think you got something to say or you want to read me the riot act, you can do whatever you want, but I can be reached at info@narcap.org.
Okay. Thank you. And I mean, thank you for just being so candid and sharing experiences that, as you mentioned, were deeply traumatic for you. I mean, it takes a brave person to do that, and I admire you for going out there and trying to get to the bottom of things against all odds. And you have really done that against all odds. And so I just, again, a big thanks. To me, there's
stay in the fight.
So much. Well, you know what? You and I have had some strange journeys together, my friend, but
yes, we have. And we aren't withholding any data to your listeners there. Just rest assured they're strange, and if you want to know, you can ask.
Okay, but, thank you. I have a feeling you'll be getting some emails, so thank you. So I just want to thank you, Ted, and please stay safe. And I want to thank everybody for tuning into UFO Classified. Like I said, you never know what you're going to get, but I think the one thing that is guaranteed is that each show has a little bitty or a very big bombshell, and it gives you more information, and I'm peeling back the layers, as uncomfortable as that is, to the powers that be that have been holding us in a state of limbo for so long. I will continue to push the boundaries, to ask questions, to do a lot of research behind the scenes, and I will make sure that I'm supporting people that have integrity and that are doing this from a good place like Ted is, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening to UFO Classified. Please make sure you go to UFOclassified.com, spread the word, contribute to the show, help keep me on the air, because let me tell you, it's there's some pushback, but that's okay. Bring it on. Thank you so much, my friends. I will catch you next week. Ted, stay safe, and all of you guys stay safe. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Take care, all.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course, the tinfoil hat guy's gonna see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it can be used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is. You just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So what are you going to do with it? Who are you giving all this to?
It just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies, what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology.
I'm not saying that because the gimbal is not a rotating flying saucer, that means that all the UFOs are false. Not at all. All I'm doing is I'm looking at this one case, these individual cases, and seeing if there's an explanation for those. So try to, if I could ask people out there listening, don't think that I'm trying to attack your entire beliefs about these things.
Nice to be in orbit.